Alright YouTube, welcome back. This is Linux in the News for May 3rd, 2016, and it's a Friday. So what's up today in the news with Linux? Well, depending on which distribution you're on, if it's Debian based, you may have a problem with systemd killing background applications or processes that you may be running on your system. This probably isn't a big concern for most users, but if you do have services or processes that you want to continue running in the background when you log off, say you're currently logged in with KDE and you want to log off and use a different desktop type, your processes, some may close, so there is a small setting change that you can make if this does become a problem in the configuration in login-d.conf. Otherwise, if you're not noticing a problem, I recommend leaving it as it is, because if a patch is needed, it'll be released fairly quickly, so I would not worry about it just yet. Fairly important in the news, CentOS released Linux 6.8. Now, as many of you know, CentOS is essentially a bit-for-bit copy minus the Red Hat logos of the popular Red Hat server distribution. And many people use CentOS because they can't afford, for one, the Red Hat subscription, which gives you support, and it happens to be the only way you can get access to the binaries or ISOs of Red Hat, although you can download and compile the source code yourself if you want, but that's quite an undertaking for your average user. Why I say CentOS 6.8 is so important, you may notice that the kernel for 6.8 is actually a 2.6x kernel, which is by most standards very old, but you do need to keep in mind, if you are working in the industry or an IT professional, you know as well as I do that many installations that are server-based are still running older versions of Red Hat and CentOS. So yes, there are newer versions of CentOS 7 that have a newer kernel, but if you have a very sensitive production system that is not able to run on the newer kernel, for example, or the complete CentOS 7 upgrade, this would be a minor update and would give you many security fixes and fixes some issues with the file system and gives you a VPN endpoint and a couple of other things. So I notice also they mention in here that Squid 3.4 caching and web proxy support is there. Many people use the Squid product for caching. They use it for filtering and as a proxy. So these products are very important, and you may again be running a server product that cannot be updated to the latest CentOS. Alright, moving on. Another problem's been found in the new 4.6.1 Linux kernel. So if you are doing apt-get upgrades on your Debian-based systems, you might want to keep an eye out for this. If you are using Fedora-based systems or any systems that use Yum or DNF, they should preserve the last 5 known good kernels. So even if the current kernel will not boot after it is updated and installed, in your boot menu you should be able to select your older kernel. I can't say if that's for sure or not in a Debian-based installation or an Ubuntu-based installation. I'd have to do a little bit of research. I haven't checked to see, but technically speaking, you should be preserving at least the last 3 kernels. It's always a good idea. Whether it's a production system, testing system, especially a server, I always err on the side of caution and keep at least a couple previous kernels so that I don't have to be concerned if something goes wrong with the current kernel. The other thing you can do if you're running a server and you absolutely need to know that the kernel updates are not going to disturb your service that you're running on the server, you could always freeze the kernel in your configuration file for your updates so that you can do kernel updates when you choose and for the reasons that you see. So if you're watching the updates on the kernel and you find there's one that's important for you, then you could install the kernel update. So here's the error message you may get on 4.61 if you have a problem updating from the kernel. This came from Ubuntu forums. This was from Mike Dawson 2013. He's a newer user on the forum, and he had a problem where he could not boot in to the kernel, and this was the error message that he received. So it's entirely possible you're going to see this. If so, you should be able to go back to the previous kernel. If you're not sure, reboot your Linux system and see if it displays a couple of previous kernels, and if you're able to select it using the up and down arrow. You should be able to. If not, might be a feature you might want to enable. In other news, Plasma 5, for those of you who are using Linux, if you're on Ubuntu, you're probably using the Unity interface. It's possible you could be using GNOME, but more than likely you are using Unity. Well, there's a lot of other desktops out there that's available, and if you're not running a system, a hardware system that has a high-density screen, high-pixel screen, I really do like Plasma 5. It's a wonderful desktop. It's very similar to Windows and very friendly. But I'm going to say this, okay? If you have a high DPI screen, it really doesn't do very well. There are many fixes that I think you're going to need to do as far as fonts and other problems. It just doesn't scale very well in comparison to Windows 10 or GNOME or Unity. Okay, given my choice of desktops for a high DPI display, I would recommend first probably going with Unity and an Ubuntu installation. Second, my preference, Fedora with a GNOME desktop installation. If you want applications that are running in KDE, which is Plasma, you can install the interface. Now, you will get font issues. I'll give you an example here. If I launch Oracle VirtualBox, see how the fonts are really huge? I come to find out that these font settings are being taken from the KDE configuration settings. So I have to make KDE configuration setting adjustments in order to display the fonts correctly. Now you may notice they're really large, and the reason for that is I was experimenting with the settings to get Kdenlive working, which is another KDE software package. So I'm going to launch KDE, and look at the font size here. Look at this comparison. So we've got the tiniest of fonts. I have been able to get them to render in size correctly and scale correctly in KDE, but it took quite a bit of work, and it doesn't mean all of the fonts in the display are going to render correctly, or the icons. Most of them do. So here we've got two applications. One that is definitely a KDE application. In GNOME, of course, I have to go in and make some setting adjustments, and I can get the font to render correctly running a KDE application in GNOME, but it is somewhat of an issue. Other applications seem to take their settings from the KDE config, so if I adjust it, I can adjust these fonts and get them more in line. So if they are using GTK Plus, they look wonderful. But if you haven't experienced other desktops, even if you're using Unity on Ubuntu, I recommend trying it out. You know, to you it will feel like a familiar interface. It's not really that much different if you're used to Windows. On the other hand, if you are a Mac user, you're probably going to find the interface is more like the interface you would probably prefer would be GNOME, which I've talked about in my previous videos. So that's the news for today in Linux land. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you soon in the next video.